In the past decade, audiences have increasingly chosen to watch murderers, drug dealers, corrupt politicians, and sociopaths as their protagonists. Not as cautionary tales, as heroes. Walter White, Tony Soprano, Villanelle, The Punisher. These characters have generated billions of dollars, millions of devoted viewers, and when these characters commit atrocities, the most common audience response is not horror, it is justification. This is not about whether these are well-written characters. This is about what it reveals, that audiences prefer watching people break rules to watching people follow them, and what they are rehearsing while they watch. My name is Winston Eves, and today from my library we are examining the anti-hero archetype. Not specific characters, the pattern itself. What anti-heroes provide that traditional heroes cannot. Why audiences across the past 2 decades have increasingly preferred morally compromised protagonists to virtuous ones. But first, we must establish definitions. The term anti-hero is often used imprecisely. It is not synonymous with flawed hero or villainous protagonist. These are distinct categories serving different psychological functions.
Winston, you splitting hairs, man. Bad guy does bad things, but we root for him anyway. That's the whole point. Why we need categories and taxonomy like you dissecting a frog in a lab?
Because imprecision leads to misunderstanding, and misunderstanding prevents us from examining why these specific patterns appeal when they do. A flawed hero has moral failings, but operates within ethical frameworks. Batman is brutal, but does not kill. Spider-Man can sometimes be irresponsible, but ultimately selfless. These characters struggle with flaws while maintaining heroic intent. A villain protagonist is explicitly villainous, and the narrative does not ask you to root for them. Hannibal Lecter is Hannibal. Patrick Bateman is American Psycho. You observe their monstrosity with fascination or horror, not identification. An anti-hero occupies the middle. They commit acts that would be villainous if performed by a villain, but the narrative reframes these acts as understandable, justified, or necessary. You are meant to root for them despite their moral transgressions. Walter White manufactures methamphetamine and orchestrates murders. Tony Soprano runs organized crime and kills competitors. Dexter Morgan is a serial killer. The Punisher engages in mass murder. Villanelle assassinates for money and pleasure. These are not heroic actions, yet the narrative invites your allegiance, your understanding, and your justification of their choices.
But them characters have reasons, Winston. Walter got cancer and wants to take care of him family. Tony got trauma and therapy. Dexter only kill bad people. Punisher lose everything. Context matter, man. That's what make them interesting, instead of just evil.
Precisely. The context is provided specifically to make the transgression palatable, to transform actions that would be monstrous into actions that feel justified, and audiences accept this transformation eagerly. This is the anti-hero's function, not to show you evil, but to show you evil that you can root for, to provide moral permission through narrative framing, and that permission is what audiences increasingly seek. Now let's examine what anti-heroes allow audiences to rehearse, what fantasies they make safe, and what impulses they legitimize through fiction. Psychologists who study moral reasoning often distinguish between what people believe is right and what they wish were permissible. Most people intellectually accept moral rules. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie. But many also feel constrained by these rules, frustrated by them, and sometimes resentful of them.
I am the one who knocks.
Anti-heroes provide safe rehearsal space for rule breaking. When Walter White poisons a child to manipulate Jesse, it is monstrous, but the narrative has spent seasons making you understand Walter's desperation, his pride, his evolution. So you do not recoil, you understand, and understanding feels uncomfortably close to approval.
Hold on now. You saying people watching these shows to practice being bad? Like they rehearsing crime in their head? That sounds wild, Winston. People know fiction from real life.
They are not rehearsing the actions. They are rehearsing the justifications, the mental frameworks that would make transgressions feel acceptable. When you watch an anti-hero kill someone and the narrative provides context that makes it seem reasonable, you are practicing the logic of justification. And the rehearsal is effective because it feels good. There is psychological satisfaction in watching rules bend for someone, and seeing authority defied, and witnessing someone operate outside constraints that bind you and succeed because of it. This is particularly potent with antiheroes who transgress against systems audiences distrust. When Dexter kills murderers who escape justice, he is not just killing, he is correcting system failure. When the Punisher massacres criminals the courts cannot touch, he is addressing institutional inadequacy. The violence is framed as response to broken systems rather than simply violence. And this framework extends beyond violence. When Don Draper in Mad Men lies, manipulates, and abandons responsibility, he is transgressing against social contracts, fidelity, honesty, and accountability. But the narrative frames him as captivating rather than contemptible. His rule-breaking can become aspiration.
So anti-heroes like permission slips then, a way to enjoy breaking rules without feeling guilty for enjoying it.
They are permission structures. The narrative does the moral work for you, providing justification so you can enjoy transgression without confronting your enjoyment of it. You are not rooting for a murderer, you are rooting for someone who had no choice. You are not admiring a liar, you are understanding someone navigating impossible circumstances. The rehearsal happens in the gap between what the character does and how the narrative makes you feel about it. And in that gap, audiences practice justifying things they know are wrong. Now let's examine what the rise of the anti-hero dominance reveals about the culture producing and consuming these narratives. The anti-hero is not new. Byronic heroes existed in the 1800s. Film noir gave us morally ambiguous protagonists in the 1940s, but something shifted in the late 1990s and accelerated through the 2000s and 2010s. Anti-heroes moved from occasional variation to dominant form. The Sopranos premiered in 1999. Breaking Bad became a cultural phenomenon in the late 2000s, and by the 2010s, the anti-hero was the default protagonist in prestige television. Audiences did not just accept morally compromised characters, they preferred them. Traditional heroes seemed naive, boring, and unrealistic.
Maybe because real heroes feel fake, Winston. Superman an alien, Captain America from another century. But a chemistry teacher snapping under pressure? That feel close to home. Anybody could imagine that. That's why people lock in.
That is one interpretation. Another is that audiences have lost faith that heroism within systems is possible. That the only way to accomplish anything is to operate outside the rules. That institutions are so corrupt, authority is so compromised, that transgression is not just acceptable, it is necessary. Consider the timing. Anti-hero dominance accelerated after institutional failures became undeniable. The Iraq War, based on false intelligence, revealing systemic corruption, political scandals, corporate malfeasance, police brutality. Each institutional failure reinforced the narrative that systems do not work and cannot be trusted. And anti-heroes provide the fantasy of what you would do if you stopped trusting systems. If you stopped playing by rules that seemed designed to benefit others. If you took justice into your own hands because official justice is compromised. If you operated according to your own code because institutional codes have failed. This is why anti-heroes are often framed against incompetent or corrupt authority. The Red Hood operates outside Batman and the police because he feels the police and Batman are ineffective. Dexter kills because the justice system fails. Vigilante anti-heroes explicitly exist because institutions cannot or will not do what audiences feel needs doing. But there is another layer. Gender and cultural performance. Male anti-heroes are often framed around reclaiming masculine agency in a world perceived as emasculating. Walter White transforms from emasculated teacher to a powerful criminal. Don Draper performs effortless masculine competence. Tony Soprano embodies a nostalgic, violently masculinity that the modern world supposedly feminized. Female anti-heroes function differently. Villanelle, Jessica Jones, and others often embody rejection of feminine expectations. They are not nurturing, not compliant, not constrained by social rules governing women's behavior. Their transgression is not just against legal rules, but against gender performance.
So male antiheroes about power and female antiheroes about freedom. That what you saying?
I am saying antiheroes often embody fantasies specific to perceived constraints. Male audiences see male antiheroes reclaim agency they feel they have lost. Female audiences see female antiheroes reject expectations they find suffocating. Both represent transgression against rules they feel increasingly arbitrary or oppressive. And there is a moral exhaustion. The sense that maintaining ethical standards while others do not is foolish. That restraint is weakness. That playing by rules in a system that does not follow its own rules is a losing strategy. Antiheroes validate this exhaustion. They demonstrate that breaking rules is not just permissible, it is effective. It is how you win. It is how you survive. And audiences watch this and feel their own frustration with constraint validated. Their own resentment toward rules justified. This is what makes the antihero culturally diagnostic. The archetype flourishes when populations feel that following rules disadvantages them while rule breakers prosper, that institutions are corrupt, that authority is hypocritical, that the only way to accomplish anything is to transgress. The antihero is not the disease, the antihero is the symptom, a cultural fever dream where the only competent, effective, admirable figures are those who refuse to be bound by the rules everyone else pretends to follow. And now we address what happens when antihero narratives become dominant. When transgression is not occasional variation, but standard expectation. When the hero who follows rules seems not just boring, but stupid. Narratives shape perception. Media effects research suggests that the prolonged exposure to specific frameworks influences how people understand reality. When you watch hundreds of hours of antiheroes, whose rule breaking is framed as necessary, effective, and admirable, those frameworks become lenses through which you view actual events. Notice how real-world rule breakers are increasingly framed using anti-hero logic. The businessman who violates regulations is not corrupt. He is distrusting broken systems. The politician who defies norms is not authoritarian. He is cutting through bureaucracy. The vigilante who takes law into his own hands is not a criminal. He is addressing system failure.
Careful now, Winston. You talking about real people now. Real consequences. That ain't the same as watching Tony Soprano on a couch. Fiction, not an instruction manual.
People know intellectually, but frameworks are absorbed regardless. When you practice justifying fictional transgression through hundreds of hours of narrative training, those justification patterns become available for real-world application. And the justifications are always the same. The system is broken. Rules are for others. Desperate times require desperate measures. The ends justify the means. These are not arguments. They are narrative logic of every anti-hero story, and they transfer. Consider political discourse. Across the political spectrum, figures increasingly defended throughout anti-hero logic. Yes, he lies, but the media lies. Yes, she violated protocol, but the system is corrupt. Yes, they broke laws, but the laws protect the powerful. These are Walter White arguments, Tony Soprano logic. The danger is not that people will literally become criminals. The danger is that these justification frameworks anti-heroes provide become the default mode of evaluating transgression. The rule breaking is not assessed through, is this right? But through, do I understand why they did it? And understanding becomes indistinguishable from justifying. Anti-heroes train audiences to be sympathetic to transgression as long as context is provided. And in the real world, context can always be provided. Everyone has reasons. Everyone has grievances. Everyone can frame their rule breaking as a necessary response to impossible circumstances.
So you say an anti-hero's dangerous now? That watching them make people more okay with breaking rules in real life? That's a heavy charge, Winston.
I am saying anti-heroes normalize specific moral frameworks. That exposure to narratives where transgression is consistently justified makes those justifications feel normal rather than exceptional. And that this normalization has cultural consequences. The anti-hero tells you that rules are for people who cannot think for themselves, that constraint is weakness, that transgressors are the truly free, that breaking rules while having good reasons is not just acceptable, it is the mark of authenticity, courage, and competence. And eventually the question is no longer, should we follow the rules, but what reasons do we have for breaking them? The framework has shifted, and once shifted, it is difficult to shift back. So we arrive at an understanding what anti-heroes provide, why they dominate, and what their popularity reveals. They provide permission to enjoy transgression, permission to root for a rule breaker, permission to practice justification for actions you know are wrong, permission to believe that constraint is weakness and that true agency requires operating outside the system. Traditional heroes are exhausting. They maintain standards, they follow rules even when inconvenient, they sacrifice personal desires for collective good, they trust systems even when the system fails them, they represent aspiration, what you should be, even when being that is difficult. Antiheroes are comfortable. They do what you wish you can do. They break rules you resent. They transgress against systems you distrust. They represent validation. What you already want to do is actually fine, because context exists that makes it justified.
That's bleak, Winston. You saying people choose anti-heroes because being good too hard now, because they want permission to stop trying.
I am saying anti-heroes flourish in cultures where institutional trust has collapsed, where following the rules seems like a losing strategy, where constraint feels like punishment for people who play by agreements others violate. In that context, the anti-hero is not just a fantasy, the anti-hero is a cope. And the cope is effective. Watching Walter White transform from powerless to powerful through rule breaking provides satisfaction that watching a hero maintain integrity despite hardship cannot provide. Because one validates your resentment and the other demands your aspiration. So here's my question for the audience. Think of your favorite anti-hero, the character you rooted for most intensely, and ask yourself, what rule of theirs did you wish you could break? What transgression did you enjoy vicariously? What action they took did you think, yes, I understand why that was necessary, even though if someone did it in reality, you would condemn them? Because that gap between what you justify in fiction and what you would condemn in reality, that gap is where the rehearsal happens, where the framework is practiced, where the justification becomes familiar and comfortable and available. And the question is whether that rehearsal is harmless entertainment or whether you are training yourself to accept transgression, as long as the framing is right, as long as context is provided, as long as the rule breakers seems to have a good reason. But these are just my observations.